Yeah. Okay. Jason? It's 6 o'clock, so we'll make a start. First item is apologies, please, James. Oh, sorry.
Yep, so we have apologies from Councillor Ratcliffe, Statham and Sutton.
The second item is the approval of the last minutes, last meeting. Presumably we've all read it. Would somebody like to move it? Thank you. Second? All right, thank you. All in favour, raise your hands. Thank you. Next item is public participation. We have quite a bit here. The first is a question from Mr. Peter Dobbs. Mr. Dobbs, would you like to read your question out? I'll do the response.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it's a statement followed by the question. You had a notice of the question, but not of the statement. Thank you. I note that there is no Ashbourne Air Quality Management Area updating report for this meeting. So I'm afraid I've taken the liberty of using this part of the meeting to present one of my own. It is exactly 1 year since this committee agreed to declare an air quality management area in Ashbourne. In that year, from the data that I have been supplied, NOx levels on Buxton Road have remained above the air quality objective of 40 micrograms per cubic metre. Despite it being part of the corporate plan, no mitigation measures have been introduced to reduce NOx levels. The steering group set up to devise the Air Quality Action Plan, as required by the Environment Act 1995, has not met in full since November the 2nd of last year. The Marsden report by Derbyshire County Council appears to be being unchallenged by this council, thereby removing all mitigation proposals suggested by local stakeholders that had some likelihood of resulting in reduction in NOx levels in the short term. By the time this committee meets again, it will have missed the lower target for the publication of an action plan by a month and have just 5 months to complete a plan before it exceeds the 18-month limit and makes itself open to legal challenge. And so my question is this, for which I believe a written reply has been published. Does this council believe that a suitably quantified and scientifically rigorous action plan for Ashbourne's air quality management area can be produced by November this year, 18 months after the AQMA was declared, given the constraints of the Marsden report? Thank you.
And the question? You going to read the question? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. The response to the question is, following the declaration of an AQMA Ashbourne, the District Council is required to produce an action plan for submission to DEFRA on how it intends to address the exceedance of the NO2 air quality objective in Ashbourne. As the responsible authority for highways, Derbyshire County Council is legally required to work alongside Derbyshire's District Council to implement an action plan. This report was put forward to the relevant Cabinet Department at Derbyshire County Council and made public in February. This will form the basis of the submission. It should be noted that this must be agreed with DEFRA prior to being adopted. Working in this way, we certainly hope that a suitable action can be produced and agreed in the necessary timescale. Thank you. Oh, yes, I will do. We have had 10 statements from members of the public. They're all published on the website, so I don't propose to read them out here. Okay. Item 4, interests in items on the agenda. If anybody has any interest to declare, please put your hand up. Thank you. Number 5 is member questions. As far as I'm aware, there are none. Because of the interest in item 9, I'm taking this item first. Item 9 is the Public Spaces Protection Order, results in proposed new officers. This is the third time this has come to council, and we currently have no PSPO in place. So I hope members will make a decision tonight. Thank you. Over to you, Ash.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, members. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of the residents and members of the public that have submitted comments for this evening, and also those who have taken time out to complete the consultation work. I'm not going to comment on each of the points in the report, but I think given the discussions that we've had at previous committees and also the discussions that we've had in the member workshops leading up to this evening, I would like to comment on the main point of the report, which is the barbecue and open fires recommendations. And I think it's right to say, as we always have done, that the proposed removal of PSPOs on public accessible open land is not because we don't believe that there is a risk, because there potentially is, but it is down to being clear on expectations with members and with the public in terms of enforcement. We've consulted with our partners in the police and the fire service, as members are very well aware from discussions that they've had and had access to those partners to ask questions about this specific issue. There is no support for enforcement of a PSPO on publicly accessible open land for barbecues and open fires. The District Council does not have capacity to enforce this, and what we don't want to do is set an expectation where there is a belief that we can deal with this through a PSPO. What we are saying instead, and as we've discussed at the last workshop and previously in committee, is that we believe a programme of education and raising awareness of the risks of barbecues and open fires is a more appropriate way of dealing with this. It's a fair reflection on what capacity the council can deliver on. So should members wish to amend that, or wish for us to impose or introduce a PSPO onto open land, I would like members to do so in knowing full well that the council does not have capacity to enforce this. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but I will leave the technical detail to Vicky and Ros, who have undertaken the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ash. Any questions before we go to debate? Councillor Buckler.
On how many occasions have we undertaken enforcement through the current PSPO?
Specifically for fires and barbecues, or for any type of...
Generally.
So we've done it in over, I think, 9 sessions we did last year. Well, it was mainly for dog fouling.
How often are we doing? So we're doing enforcement in blocks of enforcement and not.
No,
Is that?
Yeah, we don't have a dedicated enforcement team, so we do it in and around our duties, but it's a targeted enforcement. So we take information from the CRM system where residents have inputted issues of dog fouling in certain areas, and then we'll do patrols at, say, first thing in the morning from, say, 7 till 9, and then we'll do maybe a session in the afternoon and a session in the evening until about 7 o'clock. And
that's just been on dog fouling.
Yeah, or if it's been lead by direction, but those are the only ones that we've carried out.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the enforcement issue, dog fouling is a constant issue, certainly in the villages in the ward I represent. Now, you're saying that it's not, in your view, feasible to introduce a PSPO covering wildfires due to enforcement issues. The dog fouling PSPO covers every square centimetre of the district, whether it's hard or soft or wherever it is. How do you propose, therefore, that will be enforced?
So that I think everybody is aware that they should pick up sorry, that they should pick up after their dog. I think that's kind of like a normal, everyone should be aware that they need to do that. It's a moral obligation. I don't think anyone would question that, whereas fires and barbecues is a very specific restriction in a specific area. So it's about how you sort of sign that so that everybody's aware of that situation or that restriction in that area. So dog foulings, I think everyone's aware they should do it, whereas other restrictions are a little bit more bespoke and a little bit more challenging to be able to notify users of those locations that they're in place.
Sorry, Chair, could I respectfully ask that you answer the question I asked? It's a requirement that PSPO should be able to be enforced. How is it intended to enforce the PSPO relating to dog fouling?
Well, we're doing it at the moment, like I said, to do with hotspots. So we're waiting for information to come through the CRM system. So moving forwards with whatever is introduced, we're going to look at putting QR codes on the signage so that it's easier for people, members of the public or residents, to report instances of issues, and then we will then carry out patrols in those locations.
Thank you. That's much more helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a couple of questions really. What's the difference between Derbyshire Dales moorland fires and the High Peak moorland fires? And they're both as damaging, but it's my understanding that the High Peak Borough Council have taken this on board. And what is the response? I presume they've got partners that are prepared to support them. So my question is, what is the difference between a fire in Derbyshire Dales and why, have you asked the question why the police may be able to support them up in the peak and not us? That's the first question. I don't really want to do that one first and then...
I don't know the ins and outs of the High Peak one, but I do know there is challenges around enforcing it. So there isn't, I don't think there is people that do actively go out and enforce that particular PSPO.
But would you not accept...
Pardon, sorry?
Sorry. Would you not accept that once they've got once it's been declared that it is an offence to do it as such, and it can be enforced, that then empowers all the farmers that have land up there to then challenge members of the public who are committing those offences and say, you are breaching an order and you shouldn't be doing it, rather than them feeling uncomfortable by standing up and doing that. Do you not accept that?
No, I'm not saying that that's not correct. I mean, the numbers in the High Peak, from what the fire service, because obviously I don't have that data, have said that there was a significant issue there, and the same isn't replicated in Derbyshire Dales, which is why they've sort of said that they don't, there isn't enough to substantiate putting a PSPO in place. Right,
and I do realise it's got to be evidence-led. I do understand that. Can I just ask, Chair, please, is this questions for the whole of that item, including dogs and everything like that? Yes, thank you. So I've contacted Ros with 4 or 5 questions, which she's answered fairly well, but I just would like to raise the issue that I would like to make an amendment to one of the orders, or seek an amendment to one of the orders which I've discussed in the debate, if that's okay. Thank you very much.
There's nobody else wanted to ask. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Sorry about that. I'm wondering if we're... I'm a bit loud there. I'm wondering if we're in a bit of an impasse because the council officers talk about delivery, and delivery in this case is about enforcement. And yet what the people who are getting in touch with us are wanting is leadership. They're wanting leadership from us to make it possible for them to look after their environment. And do you accept that there is a difference between delivery of enforcement and leadership, and whether or not this is actually a political question rather than a question, it's a cultural question even, rather than a question of what it is the council green team can achieve?
I'll take this, Chair, if I may. I think that's a really good question, Councillor Buttle. I think it's fair to say that there is an element of that. People are wanting to protect and raise awareness of the damage that it can create, and we entirely accept that, and that is why we're proposing that we do a programmed campaign to raise awareness of the impact of irresponsible behaviour, and I think that should be a multi-agency approach with partners from the police and the fire service, and that is something that we certainly should do, but I don't think that takes away from the fact that residents will come to the council, do come to officers to ask why enforcement didn't take place, and that's why we're trying to manage that expectation. I'm just trying to be honest with people. I understand this is a contentious issue, it's a sensitive issue, and people feel very strongly about it. I just want members to make a decision knowing what the actual situation is, what the level of capacity is, and also if you look at the consultation that's come through, there is reference to enforcement in there, and if we were to propose that we could do it and then not deliver on it, I don't think that's right. I think that would be remiss of us, of officers, not to inform members that we don't have capacity to deliver on that.
Thank you very much, Ash. So, just to be absolutely clear, because the recommendations are requiring enforcement, we can't really achieve that. But if our recommendation was to put up signage in support of PSPOs, then we could probably do that.
We're not proposing putting signage up in support of PSPOs. What we're proposing is that we put up signage informing people that we don't want them to have barbecues on there and open fires and the damage that that can cause. If we put up signage saying that there's a PSPO in place, then there is a requirement on us to act on that. And just the practicalities of actually turning up in an open space. We've got a lot of land. You'd have to be there at that time, witnessing somebody doing that. And as we've already discussed in the workshop, there's also a challenge around whether those individuals have to give accurate information to officers for us to take that further forward for a prosecution or whatever it may be. We feel that there is a more achievable approach to raising awareness of the damage it will cause and working with other partners. It doesn't just have to be the police, it could be the Peak District National Park, and the damage and the irresponsible behaviour. We need to eradicate that and not have a sign there that's threatening something that we can't deliver on.
Absolutely, we definitely don't want to make a target of ourselves. I agree wholeheartedly. It would be much better that we could actually make a very positive difference here. Thank you.
We'll move to debate now. Councillor Hobson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the recommendations with amendments to recommendation 2, that in respect of barbecues and open fires, the PSPO covers Stanton Moor and the 5 main parks and recreation grounds: Ashbourne Recreational Ground, Memorial Gardens and Fish Pond Meadow, Bakewell Recreation Ground and Scott's Garden, Matlock Hall Lees Park, Matlock Bath Derwent Gardens, Lovers Walk, Pavilion Park, works with Fanny Shaw's playing field. The officers work with our partners, including representatives of the National Farmers Union, to monitor and record the number of open fires and barbecue incidents on moorland in the district over a 12-month period and report back to this committee at the end of this period. That the data collected in respect of barbecues and open fires be used as the evidential basis for future consultations on and consideration of a PSPO for moorland in the district. That the Leader of the Council write to the Secretary of State to lobby for legislation to ban the sale and use of disposable barbecues across the UK. And the amendment to recommendation 12 is that the authority be delegated to the Legal Services Manager to draft the approved PSPO and give effect to the decisions of this committee on the provisions to be included following consultation with the Chairman of the Community Environment Committee, and that the order comes into force as soon as possible. And I'd just like to say a few words. Thank you to everybody who has written to this committee or contacted their own councils. Ash and the team, I know everybody's worked really hard on this. We've had the workshops. I myself, in my area, but I've just lost it on my phone, but my local neighbourhood watch, they have a Leave the Barbecue at Home Facebook page. I've spoken to various retailers in my area. They would like it to be a blanket ban, because if they're not selling it, people will go elsewhere. I think it's time for dialogue now. We need dialogue, and then we can move on with this. Thank you.
Chair, just a point of clarification. So in respect of the recommendations in the report, recommendation 1 doesn't make a specific recommendation as to what action should take place. There are 2 recommendations within paragraph 8.1.4 of the report. So, Councillor Hobson, could you just confirm which option of A or B it is that you're proposing for recommendation 1?
For the alcohol one?
Yeah.
For the alcohol one.
So A is to remove alcohol from all sites, and B is to retain in 5 main parks, recreation grounds, which are the same as the ones that you've just listed for
Retain.
retain. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to support the recommendation and the amendments put forward by Councillor Hobson. In doing so, I think I would like to say that, yes, we've had a series of very heated at times, but very well-informed discussions and debates on this subject. I think the degree of interest and commitment shown by members of the public and other organisations has been commendable. And I think I would say I understand the position taken by our officers and by the council in previously not seeing that there was a justification for a PSPO covering wildfires. I'm pleased to say that consultation has worked, participation has worked. It's proved its usefulness, and the case made by our residents and our stakeholders has been a very strong one, and I'm gratified that our colleagues have listened to that. I hope very sincerely that when we monitor the situation over the next 12 months, that will tell us that a PSPO on wildfires will not be required. I think nothing would give me personally greater pleasure, and I'm sure my colleagues pleasure, if we had no incidents of wildfires related to barbecues over the next 12 months. But sadly, I think the evidence, certainly from Hathersage over the past fortnight, has shown that is an unlikely push on my part, because the local fire service has already been out dealing with barbecue-related wildfires. So, as I said, I'm very pleased to second these recommendations and this amendment, and I would simply like to close by thanking all colleagues in this chamber for their support during the last 18 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I welcome Councillor O'Brien's support. It has been a tortuous path, and it has been so because it's frankly poor legislation. I mean, the government had to visit this piece of legislation after it was first brought out to try and beef it up, but it's still a difficult piece of legislation. And I'd just like to read one paragraph out of the legislation, and it says, choosing the right tool, choosing the right approaches for responding to antisocial behaviour should start with identifying the specific issue or issues of concern and considering what is likely to be the most targeted and effective response in the circumstances. When you're trying to get that evidence, I mean, I think the Chief Exec had to write no less than 2 times, probably 3 times to the fire service to get the evidence. And the evidence, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, is still not there. So I welcome this approach because it gives us a year now to encourage the public to report. I agree with Councillor O'Brien, we don't want an incident, we don't want a fire. But if there are fires, even small fires, then we need to know about that, so that if we have to introduce a PSPO, we have to introduce one. My next concern, of course, is the fact that the police are not being helpful here, put as politely as that. I think if there's a law, that they have a duty to uphold the law, even if it's widespread over moorland. They do have a country aspect to their powers and officers that go out into the countryside, and I think that by working with the landowners in particular, it's something that they keep a watching brief on. This is not going to stop a portable barbecue incident. Even if we put the signs up, it's not going to stop a portable barbecue incident. And it won't stop a discarded match or an arsonist, in fact. So it needs something stronger. And I welcome what I hear coming out of government, and that is that they are talking about, and I will certainly write to encourage that follow-up. And I've said this before in council, the only answer to this is to stop the sale at source of portable barbecues, because there are too many responsible people out there. I've had it a lot down at Cromford Meadows. Fortunately, it's not moorland, it's short grass, but you look at the number of bare patches where barbecues have been left to burn, and even some sheep have been injured as a result. So I'll get Jim Fern on the case, and I'm sure Jim will respond accordingly to give as much publicity to this. I welcome, was it Aldi that's not going to do the sale anymore, and I obviously appeal to all other shop owners as well to stop the sale. So fully support the amendments, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Apologies for my late arrival. I was simply going to second the motion, but I doubt that I would have done it as comprehensively and as well as it was done. So thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't quite catch what Councillor Hobson said about 8.1.4. Was it A or B that she was B? So that would maintain the alcohol orders on the 5 main parks. Thank you.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that common sense has prevailed, and we are going down the line of this proposal. But a year is a long time, and I was just wondering whether the proposer of the amendment would consider whether or not there could be a review period, because obviously if we're going through, as we progress through the spring and the summer, and Councillor Hughes advised me yesterday that there have been a lot of wildfires all the way through West Yorkshire already this year. We don't really want to be waiting for a year to act. So at the end of the day, could we perhaps have a 4-month and an 8-month review where somebody is there to collate, not just look at the figures, but we can then act, and that way we're being more proactive rather than reactive. So that's one thing. I'd just, if you could consider that.
I'm happy, or a 6-month. What do you think is 6 months? I'm just thinking of work.
I understand that.
Just having some dialogue with Councillor Wayne, whether a 6-month review period would be helpful, bearing in mind the work that the officers have to do. Would you have a comment on that?
Chair, if I could come in. It's not an insignificant piece of work.
That's
we were just having that discussion. A lot of time and effort has already gone into this. There's other work streams that are coming into play, as members are aware, in this coming year. I think it might be a little too ambitious. I mean, if members insist that that's the case, then that's the case. We'll have to try and
okay, Ash, what about 8 months, just to get us over the summer period?
I think at the end of the summer period.
Yeah, the end of the summer period.
I'm looking at Vicky because it's her team.
So I do
back end of the year is more achievable, I think. If we do it before that, I mean, we've got to think of the coming months. The likelihood is you're going to have a peak period of good weather, aren't you? So that's going to lead until at least the back end of September. Fingers crossed.
Councillor Wayne, are you happy that we have some dialogue with them we are going to have it before the 12 months, after the summer? Or do you want to say a date now?
What I'm gleaning from what people are saying is that if people report things, you're going to have the data there. If they do, if they don't, then, but what I'm saying is I'll just need some reassurance that the data, if it's there, is being assessed, and then we can act. I don't really want to get to a year and then we have to go through all the rigmarole of that. I'm happy to do it, say, in October, and then we can be ready. Yeah. You can be ready to move forward. It's just we're being more proactive. That's all I'm seeing, and I don't want to make you any more work.
Yeah.
And there is, sorry, go on.
Can I come back, Chair, just to to make it easy for members to make the decision. We could probably do that. We could look at the interim data that we've got. If it is literally understanding the scope of what is being asked, if it is the data that we've received, then yes. If there is a wider piece of work that members are asking us to do in terms of consulting or chasing information, then that's a bigger piece of work.
I think my understanding from Councillor Wayne is it's just the raw data, isn't it, Councillor Wayne, what's come in?
You're understanding that very well.
Okay.
That's all I'm wanting. If there's a flag, that, you know, a trigger there that you're seeing, we need to react to it. We don't want to say, oh, we'll deal with that in April. We need to be in a position to move quicker. That's my first thing. If you do that, can I go on?
Can I just come back on that one point? Sorry. That's a standard approach with the PSPO anyway, and I think that's an important point to make. If we see an upward trend in activity on any of the PSPOs, we have the opportunity to review that PSPO. We don't have to wait till the end of that period to make any amendments or variations to a PSPO. So that's not an unreasonable request, and if we're looking simply at data, then yes, we can do that.
So if we said, you know, in October, sometime in October, it'll be reviewed if you're happy with that. Yeah. Can I just say the second thing, please, Chair? It's in relation to I think it's 8 on page 40. I've not noticed this, but regularly when I'm driving on past a little park off Smedley Street called Sparrow Park, I see people taking the dogs for a walk, and it shows what a poor councillor I am, that I've only just noticed that there is a dog exclusion on the thing. But at the end of the day, people are walking in there with the dogs on leads, and I've spoken to Ros about it, and the order was put there at the last PSPO. There are a lot of elderly people in that area that take the dogs along the flat and go in the park. And I was just wondering whether there could be an amendment to just have a dog on lead. There is play area in there, but it's not enclosed. So if that could be an amendment, just it's on page 65, that it's dog on lead on Sparrow Park instead of exclusion, and then I won't feel so guilty. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, are you okay as second with that amendment, to the amendment? You said
I'm more than happy with both of those suggestions.
Good, thank you. Councillor Buttle.
All right, thank you, Chair. It's great, excellent. Really good to see that we're keeping the door open. We're not closing it. We're giving ourselves the opportunities to, giving people a chance to, you know, work for their environment and keep everything safe. In part 2, we're talking about partners, including representatives of the National Farmers Union. By partners, I assume we mean the Peak District National Park Authority and the Fire Service. I'm wondering if communities and local businesses count there. Could we allow them option to make representations? Because this is, you know, like, it is the local communities and the local businesses that will really be paying the prices here if things go wrong. And I think it might be really nice to actually allow them option to comment. But, you know, if that's okay, if it's possible to sneak that in, I would love it. Thank you.
Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, as regards the barbecue, I'm fully in support of what's been recommended. Obviously, to keep an eye on what is going on, and if things change, that we can act on the data. I'm just a bit wary at the moment. Obviously, we're coming into a year of celebration, and a lot of this open area where people will be going out with picnics and the likes. So this might show a light onto that. But on a different note from the fire barbecues, I'm on about the dogs on leads and a lead by direction. And I'd just like to thank Ros and Nikki for getting back to us, myself and others, as regards I've had a lot of members in Ashbourne about the fish pond meadow, concerned that's the one and only area that's open where dogs can go and have a run freely, and and then obviously be put back on a lead. They've got no objections as regards the recreational side where the football pitch, main football pitches and things are, which is understandable, but they did feel that having Fish Pond Meadow as an area where they could exercise the dogs freely should be kept. So I'm quite pleased to hear that it would only be on circumstances of lead by direction. So I thank you very much for that. And I recommend all that's down on force. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeman.
Yes, Chair, we've come a long way since we first started this, and I'd like to thank everybody that's been involved in this. It has been hard, and the questions have been answered every time we put them forward. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with what's been said and the amendments that have been put forward as well on the recommendations in general. The only person I disagree with is Councillor Wayne and his second suggestion that Sparrow Park on Smedley Street in Matlock should be exempt from this order. Because I've been a councillor in Matlock for many, many years, and I used to get probably in the 1980s and 90s and so on, a lot of complaints from particularly young mothers with young children who took their children there and the play area there, and then they found that there was dog fouling around the play area. So it was a big problem. And of course, Sparrow Park, if you don't know it, it's surrounded by hedge or a wall, gates that are closed most of the time. In fact, there's one gate that doesn't close too well, but it was sprung at one time, so it did self-close. So what used to happen in those days was that after those gates had been put up, that people used to let the dogs off the lead and sit and watch them running around, and that was what was causing the problem, I suspect. So personally, I'm not in favour of exempting that particular part from the order, even for dogs on leads, because it's very easy to say dog on a lead, but it's very easy for someone to take the dog in if there's nobody else around and let them off the lead. So I'm afraid I don't agree with that.
Thank you. With no more comments or questions, so we'll go to the vote on the amended item. All those in favour, raise hands. Unanimous, thank you. So we'll now move back to item 6, which is the Peak Bar consultation on the government response to the landscape review. Mike, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that the report, in some respects, is fairly self-evident for members. But in essence, what we're asking members for this evening is to approve the recommended response to the government's response to the Glover report, so that we can get that into government. In terms of the actual contents of the report, much of the comments that we've made as officers in response to the government's response have been reflected upon in respect of the sort of relationship we've had with the Peak District National Park. And we've sought to highlight in the report those sort of areas where some of the changes that are being proposed as part of the government's response are beneficial to residents, but also some of those areas where there are some potential disbenefits to residents and potential disbenefits from residents as a consequence of potential changes. I thought it'd be worthwhile just highlighting 4 key areas that we see as officers as being sort of key bits of the response. The first bit is that in our recommendations, we're suggesting that there be no support from the authority in relation to the introduction of a nature recovery element of the statutory purposes, because there's a potential for a knock-on in relation to the impact on the potential for future development and growth within communities within national parks. The second element is the support actually for the extension of the statutory purposes for making sure that actually there is economic and community vitality and viability as part of the statutory purposes. So by having that in there, there's a clear message that what we as a constituent authority and what the national parks authorities have to do is ensure that they are supporting what happens within their communities. The third part of it is around, the third key issue is around the issue on representation on the board.
You'll see within the report the government are proposing that the numbers on national park boards be reduced. We have a significant geographical area within the Peak District National Park. The officers, and I think what members will agree, are of the view that even if you reduce the number down, we should have a proportionate number of representations on the board relative to geographical and population size, and that features within our recommendations. And the final one is really just a sort of a summing up, is that in terms of the comments we're making, and one is we're trying to seek, as part of the response, to encourage the government to encourage national park authorities to do more for their communities without necessarily falling back on the statutory purposes and the impact that has upon the ability to authorities like ourselves and authorities like the National Park to deliver sustainable development across the patch. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Mike, I've got just two areas where I'd like to ask questions. I thought the responses were very sensible, but there were a couple of areas where you put no comment, and those are the ones that I want to ask questions about. The first is about question 10 and questions 18, 19, and 20, and they concern areas of outstanding natural beauty. You put no comment on those questions. Is that because we don't have any areas of outstanding natural beauty, or is there another reason for doing so?
No, there is no AONBs in the Dale, so there's no response to be required on that.
And then the other area was a question about vehicles, and that was, and particularly 15 and 16. So 15 was, for what reasons should national park authorities exercise power over vehicles? And the other one of 16 was, should we legislate? And you've said no comment in each of those cases. And then 17, what exemptions do you think would be required to protect the rights and enjoyments of other users? And again, no comment. I was wondering about that really, because the damage caused by recreational vehicles can be quite extreme. And I know that it has to be a balance, but and it does affect other users. I mean, when you get a churned up green lane, it's very difficult to walk on it, and it would be even more difficult to cycle on it.
Just picking up on that point, Chair, we have given a response to question 14, which talks about how recreational vehicle use within national parks should be dealt with, and what we're saying within that is that, you know, we're acknowledging the fact that, you know, recreational vehicles can cause problems to sort of green lanes, and that we would support the introduction of sort of wider powers. But we also recognise that, you know, many of the users, as the government do, many of the users of those lanes do so lawfully without any causing any damage at all. So we need to strike an appropriate balance, and we're asking the government just to, in looking at potentially widening the powers out, and the National Park themselves use their powers where they think it's appropriate to do so. There are some traffic regulation orders in place across the park that restrict uses already, that in terms of future changes, that they do so within a balanced view. The other areas where we may not have where we've put no comment are primarily where we feel that they're either not appropriate to Derbyshire Dales, or they're not really getting at the nub of what the key issues are for Derbyshire Dales as a district as a constituent authority within the National Park Authority.
Thank you, Mike. Just going on question 15, though, there are five possible answers to that about the reasons for exercising the power that you're suggesting that should be given under 14, and I felt that putting no comment beside those gave no direction to whoever reads this response, and I 16, which is about legislation. I can understand that we perhaps are not we were perhaps not the the organisation that should respond to that. So I can understand why I've got no comment on that one. But on 15, I feel that we should have circled some of those to give some direction to the person who reads this response.
Chair, I have no objection if members wish to provide an instruction this evening for us to extend the response and change the response to question 15 to include those 3 areas or 4 areas.
Councillor Burford. Oh, okay. We'll come back to you then. There are no... Councillor Hobson, is there a question?
No, it's part of the debate. Thank you.
Well, you can stop. There's no more questions, so you might as well. Councillor Purdy.
Mike, I've responded to this public consultation, and I see you've got to get it off to the post fairly quickly, as it's due in by the 9th. I take it that all the constituent authorities to the national park are involved in this. Do you know if it's gone any wider, and when might we expect a response from government on this? And would we get a capture of the broad data from the other authorities, what they're saying? So we get a wider picture other than what we're saying.
I would assume that the other constituent authorities have made their own representations. What those are, I do not know. In terms of the timescales, this review was undertaken some time ago, and the government has taken quite some time to actually respond to the original review. And clearly, it's obviously circumstances have dictated why that might have happened. And you know, sometimes, as we all know, you know, the best will in the world and the best programming of work may mean that things are delayed or may be brought forward in accordance with the programme. But at the moment, I haven't got an idea of when I anticipate responding on this. I would say that probably a good 3 to 6 months after the closure date would be the earliest at which the data would be made available and the government's sort of indication of what they want to do, taking it forward.
Okay, thank you.
Move to debate now. Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Chair. Well, obviously, I've had a long involvement with the National Park over many, many years. I think it's important to say that I think most people would agree that the Peak National Park has provided a good service in terms of its primary purposes, statutory purposes. And it's also, I know that we're not making a comment on AONBS, but it's interesting to note that there are 44 very disparate protected bodies now, including only 10 national parks, so a lot of AONBs. And I've worked very closely with the ones in the East Midlands and North in the past on a particular project. So I know how they struggle in terms of their manpower and financing. So I think it's important that national parks particularly, and the Peak National Park principally, has adequate funding. If I can just quote from John Dow, who's one of the founders of national parks in 1945, he said, if national parks are provided for the nation, they should clearly be provided for by the nation. So that's an important principle, I think, which all governments should appreciate, because DEFRA funding is certainly inadequate at the moment. And when we talk about what the Peak National Park should do further to their present functions or activities, I think there's a strong case for asking if they're going to have to take on extra responsibilities, then they need to have extra funding. Because I know it's certainly declined over recent years to the extent that I know that staff are certainly very much overworked, as in local government, of course. And in terms of membership, I fully support what Mike Hayes has said about the 30 number. I think it's the right number, especially, well, obviously principally because of the number of constituent councils that are involved, and they all want representation, of course. So if we reduced it, then some of the constituent councils wouldn't have any representation at all, especially the very small ones. In terms of housing, I think there was a comment from Mr. Pincher, the Minister for National Parks, that more use should be made of brownfield sites. Well, I think apart from Newberg Engineering site in your ward, Chair, there aren't many sort of extensive derelict sites or brownfield sites in the National Park apart from quarries. And I'm yet to see a sort of an effective housing scheme within a quarry. I think there's one at Birchhill. I don't know how far that's been extended since I retired, but it was actually about the only one that I ever came across in terms of brownfield site development. I think I agree that there needs to be a more proactive approach to affordable housing, especially for local and younger people, and that's obviously welcome, but legal restrictions are needed to prevent too much buy to rent or holiday and weekend accommodation. And of course, the same applies to villages on the edge of the national park, but in this district, where we have exactly the same problems as villages within the national park. So that's something else that needs to be taken into account. But as I say, there's a shortage of smaller houses, and that's probably true of the Dales as well as the national park itself, where there needs to be a better or more effective affordable housing provision. So all in all, I support what Michael said in his comments on the government's views, and that I agree that in fact, I'll propose if necessary. I don't think it has been proposed yet, has it? That the recommendations are forwarded to the government as outlined in the report.
Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. Very interesting officer comments, which I do agree with. Without repeating what Councillor Burford said, I do have concerns about any lessening of representation from the Derbyshire Dales. You know, our Chair and Councillor Chapman represent us at the national park level at the moment, and I think a strong local voice is very important.
Councillor Robert. Sorry, did you second that?
I can do if you want.
Oh.
I can do if you want.
Good. So you're out. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to move an amendment that we change answer 15. So instead of no comment, it reads that we believe that environmental protection, prevention of damage, nuisance, and gross loss of amenity to other users, when there is evidence of gross loss of immunity to other users, are reasons for exercising any additional powers that may be.
Are you happy to incorporate that? Oh, sorry, Kevin. Yes. You are, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think that the last point, though, the gross loss of amenity to other users, only when there's evidence of that.
Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. And I mean, firstly, I would like to thank all colleagues who are not, who don't represent their wards in the national park for the interest in this item and the commitment they're showing. But, I think that's really appreciated by those of us who do have the pleasure of representing national park communities. And of course, we know that we've got a third of our residents live within the national park, so this is a really, really important item and report. Firstly, on the point that Gary Purdy made, I do hope that we will circulate our response to all the other constituent authorities so that they are fully aware of the points we make. I think that's important for us to do that. So I hope I don't need to formally make an amendment to that. That can happen as a matter of course. There are a couple of issues I think, and certainly one issue I think could be highlighted rather more. It's always difficult when you're answering questions as to know how to highlight particular issues. But I think this issue of whether there should be a third statutory purpose of a national park, which is about the economic and social well-being of communities, is a really important one. And the government has resisted that. And I think that's an error on their part. There's particularly an error on their part in relation to the Peak District National Park, because we are not like other national parks. We're not wildernesses. We are not simply remote areas, remote from the rest of the country. We're a network of 30-odd villages and a really important market town of Bakewell. We've got 30-odd thousand people living in the national park. So we are a living breathing community. And I think the government ignores their peril by refusing to accept that there is a really strong case for national parks having a third purpose, which is, as I said, related to the economic and social well-being of communities. I don't accept what the government says, that they already have that purpose. I've never seen any evidence that the government explicitly have a statutory duty relating to economic and social being. I've never seen it, and I've never heard the National Park Authority quote it. They always quote their statutory duties in relation to landscape protection and recreation, and that is what they hide behind every time they're asked to promote anything related to which they feel through their own professional judgments will affect landscape quality and recreation. Many of us believe that there is no conflict between an objective relating to the economic well-being of communities and protecting the landscapes. The three purposes can exist in harmony. Well-designed development can enhance the landscape, it can enhance the character of settlements, and I can't understand why there is this belief that any development is bad. I think this simplistic approach is unfortunate. And what we've seen in the national park since 1951, in the years that we've had the Peak District National Park, it's incremental, but you can see the change of in our villages and in Bakewell. Bakewell, apart from the odd shop selling pet supplies, is virtually all cafes. It's all it is. It's a cafe town. It's lost its original purpose. And the same with our villages. All our villages are slowly being turned into museum pieces. That is, in practice, what has happened since 1951. So that point, I think, as well as just responding to the question in the government's response, I would really urge that we make that particular point really, really strongly. The other issue I want to raise, the other two issues I want to raise are on governance. I do think that there is. I mean, I think national park authorities should have elected representatives. I think a lot of the issues we have with them not responding to the needs of the community are related to the fact that all their representatives are appointed and they're not answerable to the residents. I think fundamentally that's an. If national parks have all the powers that they do to regulate our lives, they should have representatives that are accountable to residents. The final point I want to make is something which the government appears to have a love affair with at the moment, and that's demand responsive transport, DRT as they call it. For those who don't follow that very closely, this means that when we have bus services that run to a schedule and one to a route, they no longer do that. They will deviate if someone rings up and say, I want a bus service to go to Village X, and they will run at different times. Now, that has a place. It has a place for people who aren't able to access normal conventional public transport, and it has a place for villages who are very, very remote from the network, and it has a place for providing transport, say, in the evenings or on Sundays. But unless you see bus transport as a transport of last resort for people who don't have cars, rather than, I think, most of us progressives see it as an alternative to the private car. If you get a bus from Hallisage to Bakewell that goes at 8:30 in the morning and arrives at 9 o'clock, you base what you're going to do in Bakewell around that timetable. If you find that when you want to get the bus, you're told that actually it now goes at 8:45 and it gets there at 10 o'clock because it's going through Bradwell and Abley on the way, that totally disrupts your ability to be dependent and use public transport, so you don't use it. And that is, in practice, what has happened with demand responsive transport. Passenger numbers have fallen, so the result of that is that you can now use minibuses rather than ordinary buses because the demand's gone down to people who are absolutely dependent on them, and therefore they're cheaper to run. So, for whatever reason, the government has picked on the Peak District National Park as an area where it wants to introduce DRT, demand responsive transport. And I was really surprised, and we, to our credit as a council, we picked that up when we had the response on the bus service improvement plan. We said as a council that we don't find favour with that approach. What we want is regular conventional public transport bus services. I was rather surprised to hear that when that was conveyed to our partners who work on the bus service improvement plan, they expressed surprise and consternation that Derbyshire District Council was not fully supportive of this new innovative idea. Well, I hope we continue to say that we're not supportive of this new innovative idea, because it is not, certainly in my opinion, and I can assure you many people who actually use buses in the rural areas, demand responsive transport is not the answer to providing an alternative means of public transport to the private car. So I do hope that in whatever forums we're in, we will continue to make that argument. We will make that argument in this response this week. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bucklow.
Thank you. I had 2 points. Firstly, the wards affected. I think that we forget that actually all of the wards in Derbyshire Dales are affected by this. I think we have a massive asset in the national park, in the Peak District National Park, which is a national park. So I completely agree with Councillor O'Brien's comments, but I think that we also need to recognise that this is a national consultation. It's not just the constituent authorities of the Peak District National Park are doing this. This is DEFRA's consultation on all of the national parks and AONBs, and we have a particular interest in one of them. The other point that I wanted to make was about point 6, which is, should a strengthened first person protect the landscape follow the proposals set out in Chapter 2, the importance of nature recovery and the role that the protected landscapes play, and this is recognised. I think our response to this misses the point of the Glover review. As a mechanism of identifying how well we are valuing nature, the best mechanism we have is protected sites. And for sites of special scientific interest, which is the UK's principal designation of protected sites, sites which are in AONBs are in better condition than sites which are in the wider countryside, and sites which are in the wider countryside are in a better condition than sites which are in the national park. And so if this is about landscape, then I think that that's correct. But in terms of nature recovery, the SSIs within national parks should be at least in as good condition as SSIs within the wider countryside, and that isn't what we've said here. So I would like to change this to this here, that actually which isn't about economic development. There is a significant amount of sites of special scientific interest, special protection areas, special areas of conservation in the Peak District National Park, and they should be being, there are significant economic benefits for us valuing those sites. They're never going to be developed. There's never going to be a development on those. They're highly protected, but they are in worse condition than sites which are outside the national park.
Councillor Buttle.
Oh, it seems that Matt and I, although we didn't consult, seem to have similar views. I'm not going to support this. I'm going to vote against it. I just think it's wrong. I think we're failing to challenge some of the odds and ends on the side of the government response, which are just wrong. Like the Glover reports, the Glover review is great. Basically, it's sound. Most of the government's response has been sound. And I think a lot of our response has been parochial. I don't think it's actually dealt with the real issues on a national basis. I think it's just a little bit sad. And there's one particular bit which I found basically offensive. It's the idea that we should be monetising nature. That's 2.2. Right? We should be monetising nature. We should be putting a value on it. And if we put a value on it, then it's just going to go the way of everything else. We have to actually look after it and care about it. And like there's other bits and bobs where like where we've said that the perceived adverse impacts of biodiversity loss, like perceived, no, biodiversity loss is real and it isn't good. And, and then the nature recovery networks. Those are things that are utterly vital to our future. And we're thinking, like maybe we should object to them because we could build some houses somewhere close. I think we've just got the wrong end of the stick. Thriving environment and a thriving community and thriving soil, they all go together. And like we can't just say, like nature recovery networks could get in our way. So no, I'm not going to vote for this. Thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
Well, I can't agree with what you've just said, Councillor Butler, but I entirely agree with Councillor O'Brien what he said, and I'd like Councillor Butler to expand on what you'd like to see in that amendment, because I can agree with you on that, but I'd like some wording, please, if you think about that before I do agree. So, picking up on what Councillor O'Brien says, a lot of what he said makes absolute sense. As a former member of the Peak Park, and I know I've not been involved as long as Martin has, but you do, when you're on that board, you do get to cherish the national park in a sort of warm way. And I can see Martin nodding, because it is a special place. It's a breathing space for all the 4 major cities around this area. I actually think Mike's got all of these answers fairly spot on. We can always argue some slight differences, I know. But fundamentally, I think what we need to get across is specifically what Councillor Bryan's alluded to. And that is that government's still not tackling and recognising, and even my attempt with Christopher Pincher MP to elude an answer didn't materialise. And that is, they're not recognising what the Peak Park now is being called, euphemistically, is a green graveyard. It's dying. Unless there's more investment, unless there's more build, unless there's more shops, and I don't entirely agree, though, with your point about pet shops. I think supermarkets have killed a lot of shops. So I think that's the answer there for retail loss of high street shops. It's supermarkets, not Peak Park. But I think we do need to send a strong message, Mike, that there is a need for this economic viewpoint on survivability of the park, because otherwise it's going to continue to stagnate. And we're saying all the time that we've got one of the lowest wage economies in the country, and yet the highest priced properties. And we're doing our very best, and I was pleased to hear at the first joint committee of the Vision Derbyshire the other day, a strong push now to lever in more businesses into this area. I don't hear that from the Peak Park. I just hear that they've got to protect the beauty and protect the naturalness. Well, that's man-made. It didn't arrive there by Romans or whoever, whatever species you want to go back to, by not husbanding it or dealing with it. It's man-made. So unless we get more investment in, more encouragement in, more business in, I'm sorry, the Peak Park's going to disappear. I spoke to Anthony McEwen, leader of IPEAC, on Monday, and he, like me, is waiting for the new chief exec to be appointed, and we're ready to jump into the next seat to him and say, right, what are you going to do, he or she? So we've put as much pressure as we can on Andrew McCloy and Sarah, the previous chief exec, and Paul knows in the meetings I've put strong pressure on about the need for affordable homes. What exasperates me is my experience on the 4 years in the Peak Park, and that's the number of times officers recommended refusal of affordable homes. There was one classic case at Carver. It was unbelievable. So there's not something wrong within the Peak Park ethos of beauty. There's something wrong fundamentally within the officer capacity in not recommending affordable homes. And that's something I want to talk to the Chief Exec about, because it's down to that level. If you're not going to get your officers to recommend affordable homes, it's no good blaming Christopher Pincher or anybody else. So you know, I think we have some local problems to sort out, not just national.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Purdy. You sort of tipped it up for me now. I was going to say similar things about about affordable housing. Councillor O'Brien will know there was a golden opportunity recently to put some affordable houses on a development. The developer was quite happy he submitted designs with affordable houses, but officers told him that he didn't need to consider doing that. And I sit on the planning up at Peak Park, and everybody on the committee was flabbergasted and thought, what a golden opportunity to actually put some affordable houses in. And you know, we actually apologised to the applicant because, you know, we had to turn it down, his application for 30 odd open market houses, and we asked him to come back and see if he would, you know, reintroduce the affordable housing. I personally think we have an issue at the officer level. They don't seem to listen to what people are saying out and about within the Peak Park. I've spoken to a lot of chairs of parish councils over 12 months ago, and the number one bugbear was housing with a lot of them, and the way that the park operated. I hope things will change. I'm yet to be convinced, but yes, there is a short list being drawn up for the new chief executive, and some of us are going to use the interviewing opportunity to press that individual or the individuals on this particular subject. On the point that Peter made reference, you know, not being accountable, I think that some of the members who are actually from authorities and whatever, I think we do feel accountable in the sense we do get mail from people. We know that we're only there because people have elected us and whatever. So I'm not saying everybody feels the same way, but I'd say there's some that do feel that we have a duty to people who live in the park and whatever. We do care about these sort of decisions we make, and you know. So I support this this recommendation, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Councillor Froggatt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back on something that Councillor O'Brien said about Bakewell, and I did take exception to it. Yes, there may be a lot of cafes in Bakewell, but let's not forget that this council is responsible for one of the best award-winning stall markets in this country that the tourists come for. We need the cafes to provide for the tourists. They're always full on a Monday. And we've also got now a twice weekly thriving fat stock market. So let's not knock the cafes in Bakewell, because we do have an eclectic mix of shops. So let's not knock it. We do need them. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. I see what Councillor Froggatt has said, and having been up there for the last 2 Mondays, the cafes are very good while we've been collecting for the air ambulance. And but I don't think Councillor O'Brien particularly meant it as a criticism. I don't think he did. So, so at the end of the day, I'm going to vote in support of this, but with the amendment Councillor Hughes mentioned, and also the comments from Councillor O'Brien, because I think we've got an opportunity, and Councillor O'Brien alluded to the fact that there's a third of the people live in the Peak Park. We've got to remember that there's 2/3 of the people that don't live in the Peak Park within our area that are impacted by what the Peak Park doesn't do. And that is very important, particularly with planning. And I've been to a couple of one at Taddington, a small affordable home development, and one that I attended with Councillor Purdy and Mr Wilson at the top of Bakewell near the school. Now, lovely developments, excellent developments, and affordable housing. But when I got chatting to some of the people that were there, some of the people from the companies, they were frustrated because some of the buildings couldn't be sold because they got agricultural covenants imposed upon them. Now, I think the Peak Park need to realise that we've said there's a lot of cafes and hotels and things like that in Bakewell. It isn't exclusively a agricultural town anymore. There's a lot of people that work in the service industry, and to put covenants on, this is what I've been told, but to put covenants on these properties for agricultural links, I think is totally unnecessary and unjust when, you know, they're empty. I don't know whether they've all gone now, but they were. I think we really do need to try and work with the Peak Park, and if we can put some, thank you, Mike, for doing this, because I've read it through, and it is a good report, but I do think we just need to beef up our role as Derbyshire Dales and say, you know, we can't go and say this is how it impacts upon us, but I do think we do need to make our voice heard and say the Peak Park needs to flourish. It is flourishing, but it is, like Councillor Purdy mentioned, a bit of a green graveyard, and that's quite sad because it's going to continue to die. What it needs is vitality. What it needs is young people in villages, and it needs the schools to be full. I've alluded to the fact that Bakewell Infants, I think it was, there were a handful of children starting there this year, and that is quite awful for a catchment the size of Bakewell, but it reflects how it is going down. So thank you very much.
Councillor Hughes, do you want to come back again?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the importance of social and economic development, and I would certainly support the remarks made by Councillor Murphy and Councillor Purdy and Councillor O'Brien. And the national parks in the UK are not like the national parks in the United States. National parks in the United States have very few people living in them, and they have a single purpose, really, which is protection of the environment. But the national parks in the UK and Derbyshire and the Peak Park is particular in this respect. They have people living in them, and Bakewell, there are lots of people living in Bakewell, and there has to be a social and economic objective as well as an environmental objective associated with maintaining those communities and maintaining the health of those communities. And we want Bakewell to be a thriving community. It is thriving. It's thriving on tourism. It's thriving on a lot of other things. And I agree that it's not only pet shops. There's an extremely good kitchen shop there, and I bought several knives there. So I'm fully in support of this, and particularly the answer to question 6, I think it is, which talks about the economic role as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Buckle, do you have any amended wording you want to put forward?
I think it's just removing the second bit, actually. I think the importance of nature recovery and the role that the protected landscapes play in this is recognised, because I think that that's the point, that, you know, that it's about the prioritisation of nature's recovery over landscape. It's, you know, at the moment it's fundamentally about landscape protection rather than about the recovery of nature. And so there are triple SIs within the national park which are being damaged because of their landscape, because of the landscape impacts. And so, you know, I don't disagree with Mike's point, but about it. But I think it's the wrong place for it. I think it misses the point of the question. The question is about nature's recovery over landscape recovery, and not about landscape recovery over economic development, because I think that that's actually reflected in other points.
James. Councillor O'Brien.
I think I can understand where Matt's coming from, and also I can understand the way Mike's phrased this particular reference. I think what Mike Hayes was getting at is that the strengthening of the purposes of the park in relation to nature recovery should be counterbalanced by a reference to the economic vitality of towns and villages. I think that's really the point he was making it. I don't think anyone has any objection to strengthening the nature recovery, strengthening nature recovery. In fact, we support it. I'm the first person to support it. But that can't be at the expense of the vitality of our residents and our village. Now, I think perhaps it is too simplistic to say that that strengthening itself would result in less affordable housing. I think perhaps that isn't the most appropriate form of words, but it is to say that that recovery should not be at the expense of the vitality of our villages. And I think that might be a more, I think that'd be a more appropriate way to phrase it.
Councillor Walker, are you okay with that?
I think fundamentally that misses the point as well. The point of it isn't about the impact on towns and villages, because the towns and villages are excluded from this thing about nature's recovery, because there's never going. It doesn't impact the development. It's about the landscape of the national park predominantly being managed for the landscape of the national park, rather than the landscape of the national park being managed in support of the sites, its nature conservation value. And so it's comparing two things. You're comparing two completely different things. It's saying that the conservation status of the national park should be about it's about the biodiversity of the national park, rather than, you know, there's no debate about whether there should be. I completely agree about the stuff about economic and sustainable communities, but it's about whether the national park should be protected for its landscape or for its nature and biodiversity. And you know, at the moment, its nature and biodiversity is doing worse than in areas of the Derbyshire Dales which aren't in the national park, and that just can't be right. And so that's. Does that make sense?
James?
That was a bit of a hospital pass, that, Chair. Thank you. I'm not sure I can detect specific wording for an amendment. I understand the spirit of what you're trying to say there, Councillor Buckler, but I'm not sure I've got any.
It's not an amendment to the paper. The paper's fine. It's an amendment to the response to question 6 in Mike's response. So I'm not asking for an amendment to the paper. Okay. It's a changing of the wording in question 6 in appendix 2 of the paper.
So what wording would you like to see there? And I'll pass it to Mike to answer that one.
Thanks. I completely understand, having heard Councillor Buckle say it a couple of times now, the sort of approach he's trying to put forward, and the sense of the sort of weight that he's trying to put in terms of differentiation between landscape and nature recovery. I have to say that, having read 6 again, I think we're trying to say within that response that we understand that nature recovery is important within the national park. It's not being dismissed within what we're saying. What we're saying is that if the government is trying to push nature recovery and enhance that, and we would support that as officers, what we've got to be very mindful of that is how that might then be utilised and used alongside the protected landscapes aspect of national park purposes. And then what that might then mean for our ability to support the sustainability of the communities within national park. Because we have a situation at the moment where, you know, the national park as an authority, and members, you know this, where whilst there is benefit from development within the park that would benefit communities, both in terms of economic development and in terms of residential development and affordable homes, there are, in quite a number of instances, you know, the Peaklish National Park themselves falling back on the statutory purposes, and those statutory purposes are utilised and used as a means of restricting development within the national park. And you know, I have said this before here, that you know, I've been with the authority 20 years and had numerous battles with the national park at various stages to try and ensure, and Paul's been in the same sort of circumstances as I, to try and ensure that the national park, in terms of their approach, is much more flexible, both in terms of economic development and in terms of residential development for the benefit of the communities that are within the national park. My response in relation to question 6 is more of a case of, we recognise that nature recovery is important, but should it be, when you combine it with the landscape aspect, should it be given absolute precedent when looking at the overall picture of what happens within the national parks? And that's the sort of caveat that we put within that response. You know, I can work with Councillor Buckle tomorrow on looking at a response that might sort of get that sort of balance that he's trying to see, but without trying to dilute what we're trying to say, which is, you know, we don't want it to be a trump card that the National Park Authority comes along and plays every single time when we're wanting to support development that's important to those communities.
That would be really good. Again, as I said, you're saying you don't want to trump nature's recovery over that. At the moment, the national park trumps landscape over nature's recovery, and so making that balance better is a part. You know, so you've spent 20 years doing that, and I've spent 20 years doing the nature's recovery bit of the national park, and I would quite like the national park to be strengthening that over the landscape stuff. You know, we've had situations where woodland, you can't do woodland creation where landowners want to create woodlands, which is a fantastic thing to be doing from a flood prevention point of view for Derbyshire Dales, but because of the landscape impacts that has, the national parks say no, you can't do that, and so so it's about making sure that we've got all of those balances right. It's not about, because I think that the way that this is done is that saying we should be balancing nature against the economy. I think the national park will say, great, that's fine, we'll do that. Actually, what they need to be doing is balancing, is not being completely fixated on the landscape value of it and the landscape value of it as it was at a certain point in time. And I'd be delighted to have a conversation with you about it to try and sort out a wording to do that if everybody's happy with that.
So, Councillor Buckler, you are not making a change to it tonight, just because it's tomorrow.
I think, Chair, reading the nods around the room, I think everybody's in agreement.
Yeah, good, okay. Councillor Buttle.
Thank you. It looks like I'm not in as much a good disagreement with Mike as I originally thought. It's because I was just trying to say what Matt said. I just want, if we get the nature right, then the people will come. You know, the more nature we have, the more people earn, the more people live, the more people live well, the more thriving everything is. And you know, a rewilded landscape employs twice as many people as a standard landscape. You know, these things can actually turn the national park round, turn it into something which is absolutely thriving. And I'd be absolutely in favour of that. And it sounds to me like Mike and Matt might well be able to turn the answer to number 6 into something which I could definitely agree with, which would be fantastic. And then my only real major problem is with 220, which is about monetising nature. And I just don't see how we can support that. I know Mike says that he agrees, but I'm not sure that we actually have thought about what happens if we start putting a price on nature. You know, like, do we start selling it, buying it? The whole thing is just a really, you know, like, we could end up with, you know, selling our nature to someone else, you know, and then where are we? The whole thing's it's unhealthy. But anyway, I think I'm going with an abstention now. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have no more speakers. It has been moved and seconded with slight amendments, as per Councillor Hughes. All in favour? Okay. Against? Abstentions? Okay, so that is passed. So the next item, item 7, is the Levelling Up Fund Bill. Steve, please.
Chairman, thank you very much. And this is following up on approval that members gave us at the last Community and Environment Committee meeting, which was to prepare a bid, but do some more work on that. And just to clarify one thing which came up in the members' workshop that we held a couple of weeks ago, this is purely about the Levelling Up Fund. It's not about the wider Levelling Up agenda or the Levelling Up white paper. It's a Levelling Up Fund, which is a specific, discrete fund, which is available for the District Council to bid to, and this is essentially asking for your approval to make that bid. Since we last met, there's been further site visits, there have been workshops and analysis undertaken, and the other thing that's happened since then is that the government has actually announced the dates for the round 2 Levelling Up Fund bid, and bids have got to be in, well, 13 weeks from now, essentially, on the 6th of July. The guidance remains at the moment the same as the round 1. We're still waiting for a technical paper and the detailed bid template to be produced, but more or less it remains the same, and the criteria remains the same. And on that basis, we, with our consultants, have been looking to recommend to you the strongest possible bid for the Derbyshire Dales, one that will secure the maximum investment for the district. It has to be a coherent package, and I'll come to that in a moment, but it also has to be something that works within the, as I've said, relatively short timetable that remains. Just to comment on some partner engagement, we have been working in this time and before that with the Ashbourne Town team and with Matlock Community Vision, and I wish to record my thanks to both of those. We've had really positive engagement with both. Ashbourne Town team have done a tremendous job, and Matlock Community Vision have also been really good to work with. And I should also mention that we've had discussions with the MP as well, whose endorsement for the bid is crucial to make it forward. Cutting to the chase, there were two possible, when we last met, there were two possible ways forward. One was for an Ashbourne only bid, or the other was for a combined Ashbourne and Matlock bid. The combined bid does have some challenges associated with it that a one-town bid hasn't, and they're outlined in the report for you. And on the basis of the working with our consultants, working on the bid development that's been going on since then, we're now recommending to you that there is a Ashbourne-only bid to the Levelling Up Fund. The 3 projects are as set out in the report. However, recognising that there is a really good case to be made for doing further work in Matlock, we're also recommending that we work with Matlock Interest to develop further potential core schemes, which could be put forward for future infrastructure bidding rounds that might come forward. Obviously, members will be more than aware that the District Council itself is putting more than £1 million of its own money into infrastructure development into Matlock. But alongside that, we'd like to work on things that will complement that as well, but outside the Levelling Up Fund process itself. So the next steps are set out in the report, Chairman. We've got 13 weeks now until well, we're recommending that will be a further meeting of this committee in late June to sign off the bid, and then it will be put forward to the government. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy. No. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't got any questions. So I wanted to just go comment on the bid, on the...
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have 3 questions. I'm confused about just how much in government grants as opposed to our constricted council budgets have been used in order to progress these two LUF2 bids, including huge consultants' fees. I think we supported expenditure up to 300,000 at a meeting in February. So I suppose I combine this with the second question, really, I suppose. I'm very concerned about the multi-millions that are being spent on the extravagance of at least 5 consultants, I understand, probably on each bid. And those who met the MCV steering group twice obviously charged infinitely more than their consultants Aspinall Verdi, who a few years ago did some detailed work. I think it was a 25-page report that cost just £10,000. Just how much have our consultants charged? I'll leave the third question until this has been answered.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, the last meeting of the committee did approve up to 300,000, but that wasn't just for putting the bid forward. That was also for developing the bid, managing the bid, and then implementing the bid as well. So it wasn't just for this phase, it was for the future phases that are still to come. And the reason for doing that was simply that we don't have those internal resources. There's some very specialist skills that are required, which we and indeed most councils don't have in-house, such as economic details to make the value for money bid and the benefit cost ratio, such as quantity surveying and so on. So those are skills which we don't have, and we were quite open about that, and that's why council has granted those funds. But just to be clear, it's not just for making the bid. And it's for the future stages of developing and implementing and delivering the bid as well, Chair.
Yeah, and the next question is about the amount of money being devoted to this scheme, really, by the government. I think they've been misguided, really, and they've squandered millions, I think, on this, what is hinted at in the report, actually, highly complex and competitive scheme. I'm full of praise for the efforts and impressive work carried out by the Ashbourne Town team. But why does our government appear to prefer a £12 million project, really big money, compared to Matlock's £4 million, just to complete what has been envisaged already and researched for many years and is now within sight of being realised? I think that's obviously a question that Steve may not be able to answer. It's slightly political, I guess. But
I can't answer the detail of it. All I would say is within the constraints that the government have set, we're trying to come up with our best possible chance of winning that 12 or more £million, and this is our best shot at it, Chair.
I've no further questions. Oh, Councillor Wayne. Sorry.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Just following on from what Councillor Burford mentioned, I'm sure that people tuning in this evening in their droves will be somewhat concerned that we have paid or authorised £300,000 in consultancy fees, and that is only part of the consultancy that the District Council does pay in a year, but we're not able to provide any enforcement to issues that affect our public. So is there no way that we can claim back that funding if we're successful and incorporate the £300,000 within the actual bid? So our taxpayers aren't £300,000 light. That's the first question. And the second question is, at item 8.2, the last line, it says, with regard to flood resilience measures, engagement will be ongoing. Can you tell me which flood measures you're on about? And secondly, what measures will be ongoing and what are the District Council seeking to do? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So 2 points on the funding. One is on the 300,000, actually 125,000 of that has been provided directly by the government anyway. So nearly half of that's come already as a capacity funding grant that the government has provided. The rest of it was what members agreed would be up to 175,000. At the moment, we're clearly nowhere near that. But either way, 300,000 or 175 to get 12 million, the equation is in our favour, I would say. And we do also have to have a match funding element to any bid as well, which the government will take into account when they're assessing value for money. With regard to flooding, this is something we gave very serious consideration to in this. As it says in the report, the timing doesn't work for Levelling Up Fund, which is a pity. But you know, we'd wished it would. We've spoken to the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority, and those two are clearly taking a lead on that. Actually, physically, literally at the moment tonight, taking a lead on some initial works on that. We'll be guided by them as to what's going to be feasible as well, and we're going to keep that dialogue, and that's what 8.2 is saying really. We'll keep engaging with both the Environment Agency and the lead local flood authority, and indeed any other any other agencies that are involved in that as well. It is ongoing, and they're in the lead, but from the District Council's point of view, and you know, I think everyone at the District Council, including Councillor Wayne, would want to keep putting the pressure on those agencies.
Yeah, if I just come back quickly. So are you talking about the riverbank that collapsed in the most recent flood, or are you also talking about the issues on Bakewell Road? Because when I speak to the Environment Agency, they're sort of like distancing themselves because, particularly with Bakewell Road, the issue is their flood wall on the river, but the other issue is a surface water runoff. So it's a completely different kettle of fish. And I was chatting to a lady from County Council the other day who I'm going to have a site visit with next week, and she got serious concerns about, well, that they're actually doing quite a lot of assessment work currently. Are you talking about the Bakewell Road issue, the river issue at the bridge, or both? Thank you.
Chairman, it's both, and to be blunt, I think part of our job is to make sure that all those agencies don't try and duck any one element of it. They keep talking together, and they recognise that they have to work together, and it's our job as I suppose as a third party to make sure that they do.
Good luck with that one.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we're not the main player in flooding. Notwithstanding that fact, I've continued to put pressure on ever since I spoke to the Prime Minister across the road here, and I've continued to keep that pressure on two further meetings I've held with him over 2 meetings before the lockdown period. And we will continue to put that pressure on. It is the Environment Agency's responsibility. Steve's right, we have looked very seriously at flood alleviation in the LUF. For example, there was talk about putting some real, large-scale water tanks in that car park next to the bus station. And that's feasible, but that's not affordable. And if it becomes affordable, it's only because we've become successful in an LUF bid for Matlock. But that's going to take time, so we're not going to achieve in this Tranche 2 monies that kind of money. So that's where we're coming from. So if I can go back when we first were not able to achieve Tranche 1 monies because the government didn't give us sufficient time, I tasked Steve and his team, and I thank them profusely for the hard work they've put in to bring us to this level. And I go back to a meeting I had with Ashbourne traders in 2019, who argued very strongly that the reason for the loss of the high street shops was the charging structure of our car parks. And Steve, bless him, provided me with a very weighty report of economic assessment carried out on Ashbourne in 2014. And so with 80-odd traders in that room, I was able to argue back that it wasn't the car park charges that was causing the loss of high street shops. It was the fact that they'd not picked up the economic assessment from 2014 and done nothing about it. We did, though, manage to achieve a very good result, and that was thanks very much to Anne Wright, who responded very positively to that meeting and set the Ashbourne Town team up. So when it came to not being successful in Tranche 1, as I said, I tasked Steve and his team to get some shovel-ready schemes and to concentrate on our 4 market towns. At that time, I did sort of take an inward breath and thought, well, if the 4 market towns come forward with bids, that's going to water down each bid. So, in a sense, I don't want to be rude, but I'm grateful in the sense that Wirksworth and Bakewell didn't come forward with anything. and it left Matlock, and it left Ashbourne. And there's been accusations along the route of political bias. We've even been accused of being biased towards Ashbourne and biased towards Matlock. That's nonsense. You know full well that our group fully backed the cinema project to put extra monies in to make sure that that cinema project got over the line. We will continue and try and achieve some LUF monies for flood alleviation. At the same time, pressing the responsive authority, and that's the Flood Minister and the Environment Agency. So I'm pleased to see that Ashbourne has come on leaps and bounds from where they were at for a few weeks ago. And I welcome the fact that they're being put forward. I welcome the fact that we're going to continue with Matlock Vision, because Matlock Vision has been around for a long time, a lot longer than Ashbourne, and I can sort of understand some questions. Well, why is Ashbourne suddenly overtaking 15 years of Matlock Vision work? It's criteria. It's as simple as that. It's government criteria. It comes down to no political bias. It comes down to the external consultants we're employing. And we've always had this argument about how much money we spend on consultants, but we haven't got the opposite capacity. And without those consultants, as Steve said, £300,000 pulling in against 12 million is small fry. I think Chesterfield Borough Council spent something like 600,000 to get their LUF bid successful. So you have to speculate to accumulate. So I just hope that Ashbourne are successful, because let's face it, Matlock and this district has been bereft of any significant grant monies. We've had £1 million worth, yes, towards Ashbourne roundabout. We've had monies put into Riverside. But as far as comparison to other towns in the country, if you look at what they've achieved, we're way behind. And I want us to get further forward in that race. So I recommend to our officers, henceforth, we have shovel-ready schemes on your shelves, ready to go, in case there's any more grant monies from government. Thanks, Chair.
No question. No, okay. Councillor Burford, have you got a question?
No, I thought, yeah.
Councillor Hughes, is yours a question?
No, mine's debate.
Okay. O'Brien?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a fairly technical question, which I'd like answered, because I think it would reassure partners in relation to flood resilience measures. And Gary Purdy's referred to that being the prime responsibility of the Environment Agency, which of course it is. Now, my understanding of government regeneration funding available to local authorities, it is not available where the primary responsibility rests with another department of government. So I would like a view from Steve as to whether flood resilience measures would in fact be eligible for future regeneration funding, just in order to avoid any misapprehension on the part of partners and residents.
Chair, I mean, there is potential for physical infrastructure measures to be part of a wider scheme, but they would have to be part of a wider scheme, and they'd have to meet all the other criteria for the bid, so delivering a coherent bid that fits in with the regeneration aims as well. I suspect that flood measures on their own wouldn't meet those criteria. They'd have to be part of a wider scheme. But in this case, you know, the timing is the key criterion that makes it unfeasible in this case. The immediate measures, which you've seen the start of today, are too soon to fit in Levelling Up Fund, and any further scheme of the site that's been talked about will be too late for Levelling Up Fund. So it's more like the time lag to create those detailed infrastructure measures just don't fit within the relatively short timescale of Levelling Up Fund.
Councillor Ball, have you got a question? No. Okay. Councillor Hughes, moving to debate now. Councillor Hughes.
Yes, Chair. I'd be happy to move this, to be honest. I think the proposals are sensible. I think Ashbourne has got a good set of proposals to bring forward. The three that are highlighted in the report make a lot of sense. They hang together very well, and therefore I think they are very strong in relation to the criteria. The Matlock proposals are not fully worked up as far as I could see. There's more work is needed on those, and therefore I think it would be premature to bring those proposals to put those proposals in the bid. So therefore I'm fully in support of the proposals, the recommendations in the report. I would ask Steve if you could include in your list of consultees on Matlock Town Councillors and Matlock District Councillors, because I think we have some views on, and the Town Council will certainly have some views on the proposals that are being put forward in relation to whether they're in this report or in the annexes, and therefore probably forming the basis for future reports. And there are areas of Matlock which do need development. A lot of the problems in Matlock is not about the public space. It's about the use of the private owned buildings and the way in which they are not being developed or they're being left to gradually deteriorate. And therefore, there's an issue about whether it's possible for the district council, through government funding, to do anything about those particular areas. Whereas in Ashbourne, freeing up the public spaces from cars, excellent. Changing the road layout to increase safety. I've tried to cross those roads in Ashbourne, and it's very, very difficult. So the proposals in the Ashbourne schemes will make it a lot easier, will make the town centre a lot more attractive, and therefore I'm fully in support of this. And Councillor Purdy, I can't see that this is a political thing either. I think this is well balanced. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Councillor Bull.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I'd definitely like to second this proposal. I thank Councillor Hughes for stating the simple facts of what Matlock has got, obviously in the knowledge that he represents Matlock, as I do Ashbourne. Initially, when it was all first come about with the Levelling Up Fund on level 1, we knew Matlock Vision were interested to do with the cinema, but as regards lots of other projects that were there, haven't really been put towards us for the knowledge of what they were. So obviously the criteria that leads here, as we've been led to believe, is Levelling Up Fund has to be shovel ready, as they say. And I certainly know now, for the work that I've seen and from the documents of Ashbourne Town team, that they have really been working very, very hard to get all these implementations through. And whether I say this rightly or wrongly, I hope they do go forward and Ashbourne we get in and we do get the Levelling Up bid fund. But I can assure you that town team are adamant that this will go ahead, irrespective. They're already having meetings with the highways where they were putting in the post for sorting the roads out the other day. They've already got planning permission for the Methodist Church, which has already got part funding to it. So there are lots of things that are there. So it's not going to fully rely on that. It will happen, but it'd be nice to think that the government are going to pay for something instead of the local people half the time with something that needs to be improved, which can only benefit Derbyshire Dales as a whole to bringing the economy up and getting more visitors where people want to come and possibly want to put their businesses and work from here. So I would like to second that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burfoot.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to endorse what other members have said, particularly Councillor Hughes, I think, in terms of Matlock. But I must say I'm finding it very difficult to take these proposals too seriously while we're witnessing the depravity of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the genocide, as well as destruction of so many buildings and public realm on our TV screens several times a day. Eventually, the cost of reconstruction there will be enormous. We're talking now about levelling up when so many towns and cities in Ukraine have been levelled to the ground. I must say I'm fairly cynical about this funding programme still, which prefers big money grants compared to the completion of modest enhancement of, for instance, Matlock's town centre. Steve Capes and other officers involved should be thanked, though, for producing such a comprehensive report. I suspect their real work will start tomorrow on the Ashbourne project, on the Ashbourne bid. It's ironic that Ashbourne could receive so many millions, of course, to repave much of the town centre, while our county council refuses to fund about 100 metres or so of quality paving to continue what was done in the Impress scheme a couple of decades ago nearly, compared to obviously Blacktop in front of M&S and our new cinema. Obviously, I'm disappointed that Matlock has been overlooked this time, but I do congratulate Ashbourne, especially their town team, and wish them luck. The team certainly deserves success, and the town needs it urgently, although I do wonder if the entire project can be delivered on time, because I know the deadline is for implementation is March 2025, so it's not too long really for implementing a scheme like that when you think how long Matlock cinema development has taken to, or not even materialise yet, but to get to even a tendering situation. Finally, I've read through the additional proposals, which is what Councillor Hughes hinted at really, outside Bakewell Road for Matlock. For the first time in this report, presumably it's been put forward by consultants, of course, but I'm disappointed that ward members have not been consulted at all. We could have contributed to the project bid if only we'd known about the objective and extent of it, some of which I don't agree with at all, actually. But this is just a symptom of another ill-thought-out government scheme, and probably the use of consultants who are not necessarily familiar with the geography of the places that they're dealing with.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping to second it, but I'm pleased you have, Sue. And as a regular visitor to Ashbourne, it has become apparent to me that, you know, it is in need of some refurbishment. There's no doubt about that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think from seeing Matlock, it's doing well at the moment, in my opinion. I'm not just saying that because I'm the mayor, but it is doing well at the moment. You know, there's good footfall, and we have got hopefully the cinema that will be coming along. I do think that there's a lot of criteria in this, and Ashbourne is a lot better placed to fulfil that. And I just hope that you get it moved along. And if you have got some money left, we'll have some paving. But I know we can't do that, but that's all I'd like to say. But just finally, I do realise, Mr. Capes, that the flooding can't be dealt with on this particular tranche. I do understand that, but I just wanted clarity that we are looking at both things. Thank you very much.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support the recommendations, and I wish every success to the Ashbourne bid. I think quite right that this should have the priority of the council and partners for this particular bid. Of course, we are going to spend, as we've already heard, we are committed to spending £1.2 million in Matlock. We have spent, and we're already going to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on housing regeneration in Matlock. But there are other towns and there are other villages and rural areas in the district equally in need of regeneration. I don't doubt the merits of Matlock regeneration, but as I said, there are the rest of the district to consider. There's Bakewell, Wordsworth, our villages, our rural areas. So I do have concerns about recommendation 4 in this report. I think recommendation 4 would clearly put Matlock as an advantage in relation to other areas with regard to future rounds of regeneration bids. I think that we've made no decision as a council about priorities for future bids, including the Levelling Up Fund. And of course, the Levelling Up Fund has 2 other priorities: transport with a green tinge and culture. And again, we have council made no decision or even had a discussion about future priorities. We hear frequently that as a council we've got limited resources. Recommendation 4 risks, I'm not saying it will happen, but it risks tying up our limited resources in taking forward more projects in Matlock. Where does that leave the capacity to investigate the development of further bids in Bakewell, in Tideswell, in the rest of the district? Now, as I said, I don't have any objection to taking forward projects in Matlock. I'm fully supportive of that. But as we have not made any decisions or had any discussions about our future priorities, I do think we have to be mindful that there are other needs in the remainder of the district. And I have a concern that we are preempting any future decisions by focusing all our resources on Matlock at this stage, our forward-thinking resources. We've learned to our cost that if you don't do some forward planning, some forward thinking, some forward investment, you're not in a position to put forward successful bids. And I don't think without being rude, I don't think in future sending an email to Bakewell Town Council to ask them whether they've got any regeneration projects is really doing justice to the needs of Bakewell, let alone the needs of Tideswell and other areas. So what I would like to suggest, without changing recommendation 4, is that we do, within the next few months, say within 4 to 6 months, we do have a series of workshops as councillors, not just this committee members, but all members. We do have a series of workshops to consider our regeneration priorities, both geographically and thematically, and that we engage as part of that process with our town and parish councils and with our other stakeholders. Now, I could make that as a formal amendment, which I hope would find some support, because it's not intended as a criticism of recommendation 4. It's intended as looking at some of the implications of recommendation 4 and the fact that I think we do need to be mindful of the needs of the rest of the district. But I'd hope that officers would feel they could see the advantage in engaging members and stakeholders in a discussion about priorities, as I said, geographically and thematically over the next few months. Alternatively, I could put it forward as a formal amendment, but I prefer not to do that because I know some people get rather tired of my amendments. Thank you, Chair.
Well, obviously, I need to respond. Thank you, Chair. Councillor O'Brien, thank you. I think you're missing the point. The fact is that we're responding to the Levelling Up Fund from government, and that's the only game in town at the moment. I agree. I do not like this Levelling Up Fund. I've called it a lottery. It's, to me, not fair across the board. But we have to make a stake. And the fact is that we couldn't spread it out to all of our villages and all of our towns because £20 million wouldn't have gone anywhere, quite frankly. And we'd got to fit the criteria. And the criteria didn't particularly fit anything other than our market towns as a starting point. But you do make a valid point. I'm not particularly keen on workshops, but I think what we could be looking at, and I'll talk to the Chief Executive and Steve about it, one criticism I will make in coming into leadership here is the fact that we haven't got any shovel-ready schemes on the table, and we were left behind. And other authorities were much more ready than us, and I think, therefore, we've got to get ready now. But having said that, we've had this massive lack of officer capacity. It's hindered us. It's incapacitated us. That's been exacerbated by the pandemic. So I'd like to say, and I hate the phrase, but I'll use it, going forward, I think it is something we certainly ought to look at and say, what does our district need? How can we help its future? And I think if you want to call it something else, I'm happy for it to be called something else. But at a broad brush, I think the economic and viability and sustainability of our whole district is important to us. As I said, the first meeting of the Joint Council on Monday at Chesterfield put an agenda item on the table which is to deal specifically and target levering in big businesses into Derbyshire. And obviously we're on the, not on the coattails, but we're on the breast pocket of that. We're at the forefront of that. So I hear what you say, Councillor Bryan. I don't think a workshop will achieve it. I think what it will need, and I'll discuss it further with Steve and the Chief Exec, is to take a strategic view forward how we regenerate these areas that need regeneration. We spoke about the Peak Park wanting regeneration. We can't escape and not look at our own areas.
Sorry, could I just respond on that, Chairman? I'm not denigrating. I agree with you. I mean, I think you're using different words to describe what I'm trying to say. I'm not denigrating the current bid, but there will be another round of bidding. And all I'm saying is that if we tie all our officer resources, our expertise up in focusing on Matlock, we won't then be in a position to look at prospects in other areas. I'm perfectly happy to look at Matlock. I see no problem with that, but we need to have a level playing field, to use another phrase I dislike. So all I'm saying is we do take a strategic look as members and our partners to see where, reach a consensus on where we should be focusing our regeneration effort, and not assume that it's going to be in Matlock.
No, there's no assumption there, if I may come back, Chair. I think you criticise an email going out. It was necessary to put an email out to the 4 town councils to ask them, to invite them to consider this LUF. So in the future, I think, therefore, there might be a need to put that same email out to all of our village and parish councils to say, this is what we're looking at. What do you want?
Steve, do you want to come in?
If members will allow me, I think I might be able to help. At the last C&E committee, I put a report forward on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the if you like, the next thing that we will have at our disposal to bid for. And in order to get funding from that, we have to agree an investment plan, which has to be agreed by councillors and our partners. And so over the next couple of months, we'll be doing exactly what Councillor Purdy and O'Brien are both saying, which is coming together with members and partners to agree an investment plan for future economic development in the district.
Councillor Ball, do you want to come back?
Yes, if I could, Chair. I can see the point that Councillor O'Brien is making, because it just stipulates Matlock, and obviously, as we have said, and even Councillor Purdy has said before, you know, any regeneration should come within the hold of the district council. So if it comes to be that, and obviously I'll nod over to Councillor Hughes at the same time, but as a wording on that, instead of it just being Matlock, the district council develops potential core capital infrastructure projects within Matlock or any other town or parish for regeneration purpose within the district council, within the district area. I think then it's giving the whole opportunity and doesn't look as though it is a closed shop in that aspect. Whether that fulfills the criteria or not, I don't know.
Councillor Hughes, do you want to come back?
Yes, Chair. I think I'm reasonably happy with that. I would say the potential core capital infrastructure projects in Matlock, and as Sue said, and then continue with a view to creating a pipelines of projects for submission. So we're taking out the words working with key stakeholders, including Matlock Community Vision, to shorten it a little bit as well. There was one point I'd like to make as well as that would be that we're getting to the end of this particular council, really. But May 2023 is not very long away. The time to get, it's not very long to go, only 1 year. And it strikes me that any investment projects that come out of any plan, such as the one that Steve is suggesting, need to be taken forward in a new council. So can I ask Steve to note there will be an objective in the next plan for the council to develop this sort of pipeline of projects, capital investment development projects, and then that can be, we can then take those forward, or whoever is councillor can take those forward in the next period.
Steve, do you want to respond to that? No?
No, Chair, only to,
Okay.
to agree. And yeah, the Shared Prosperity Fund will be for a 3-year period starting now for the next 3 years, so it will overlap into the next council.
Councillor Wakeman.
Yes, through you, Chair. I'd like to thank Steve for this report. I'll be supporting it. We did get an offer at Bakewell to go for this levelling up fund, but we were not ready to go with anything at the moment, so we decided not to. Thank you.
Councillor Burford, do you want to come back?
Yes, just briefly. I think some members are forgetting the one of the purposes, I suspect, of recommendation 4. That's, as Councillor Wayner said, that's to undertake works to introduce flood resilient measures into Matlock, both the river and obviously other issues in terms of surface water runoff, but also, of course, to complete the half completed project with the cinema and the corner unit facing Bakewell Road. There's obviously one of the long-term objectives of Matlock Community Vision was to provide some community space, and that's what's going to be probably a dark, dead hole for the next 10 years if we don't find some funding to actually make it into what it was always intended to be. And so we'll have it won't look very attractive in the short term because it's going to be a temporary wall on the west side of the present rooftop car park next to the new corner unit, food and beverage unit. So that has to be completed. So there needs to have funding for that. You can't, because we haven't succeeded in persuading the council that Matlock should be take the benefit of the LUF2 bid this time. I think the implication from officers in recommendation 4 is that that should be, or there should be some future potential for funding bids in order to complete that project. That's all I want to say, because I think you've got to make sure that Matlock does get that. I'm not against any further schemes in other towns and villages in the district, but to leave one project half finished for year after year is not satisfactory. And of course, as Councillor Wayner said, it's the all-important flood resilience measures need to be prioritised.
Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just a little bit confused now. Perhaps if Steve could just clarify what the recommendation 4 means in its original form and where he sees the other towns and villages going, because I think there's just a bit of confusion here.
Chair, with your permission, recommendation 4 is, I think Councillor Burfoot and Wayne have described it well, and it is to take forward schemes which aren't quite shovel ready, but they are sort of, you know, on the digger perhaps, a few steps behind in Matlock. And so that's specifically for that purpose, for the capital infrastructure funds that we're talking about at the moment. With regard to other towns and villages, we do have, and members agreed at the last C&E committee to develop an investment plan for that. So you already have agreed to work up an investment plan, and which I've said, you know, happy to involve members and certainly would want to involve partner organisations such as town councils and others as well to work that up as well. So we have, through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, as you agreed at your last meeting, a mechanism in place to pick up those other towns and villages and other schemes, capital and revenue spending, so perhaps opportunities for some more immediate spending in that regard as well. Recommendation 4 is as described. It relates particularly to the capital schemes, but the other towns and villages and other initiatives that members rightly are keen on, and so are we, they'll be picked up through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and members at your last meeting agreed to develop that over the next few months.
Councillor Hughes as mover, do you want to sum up?
No, sorry, thank you very much, Steve, for that explanation, which means that probably we don't need to amend recommendation 4. So thank you very much for that. But I would just point out that the code of conduct for councillors is that we represent the whole of the district, not just Matlock or not just Ashbourne. We represent the whole district. Thank you.
Councillor Wayne.
Just some clarification, if I may. We were talking about the Peak Park earlier on. Does the Levelling Up Fund go into the Peak Park, and do they do anything to enable, if not, why not? But why can't they be getting some funding and that they're putting out to the communities? And I don't want to us and them at all, Peter. What I'm wanting is for everybody across the whole of the district to be treated fairly, without any political bias, because I don't have any political bias at all. But, yeah, honestly, but I just want all communities to be treated fairly and equally. That's all it is. And I just think, I presume the question is that the Peak Park don't get any funding then. Thank you.
Well, just to clarify, the National Park Authority are not able to bid for the Levelling Up Fund. But as I said, for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we would, I'm sure members would want that to spread over the whole of the district. So that's up to members at that time.
No further speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. The final item is item 8. Private rented sector study. Please, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. This report, I think members will agree, is a good news item. We've applied for some funding from the Local Government Association and been successful, along with about a dozen other councils. We're working in partnership with Amber Valley Borough Council, and in paragraph 1.3 we set out really what we want to achieve as part of the study. I think particularly for me, I know that, and I'm sure many of our most vulnerable residents live in the private rented sector, and this is an opportunity to explore, work out what are the best interventions we can make to support residents within the sector. It is the area where most of our homelessness comes from, so landlords serving notice to quit creates homelessness, but it's also a key place where people who aren't really able to get into social housing are able to find accommodation. And we also spend a vast fortune of government funding through housing benefit and universal credit payments into that sector as well. So there are energy efficiency issues, particularly I'm sure with the change in bills that are hitting people at the moment. That will be most extreme in the private renter sector. And generally conditions can be poor and rents can be high. So it's somewhere we've not really been able to spend much time from a housing strategy point of view in the past. But this funding gives us the opportunity to develop some working proposals we can bring back to members for future consideration. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that there's no mention of holiday lets in this. I gather this won't touch holiday lets. However, I've been surprised by the number of holiday lets in the locality on Matlock Bank where I live, and Wellfield, for example, has, and Wellington Street have holiday lets, numerous holiday lets. Even the little terrace behind my house has 2 holiday lets within it. And this is Matlock. This isn't a pretty rural village in the Peak District. There's a shortage of rented accommodation, private rented accommodation. I looked for a private rented accommodation in January. I could find 2 apartments, two bedroom apartments to rent in Matlock. There's no rented accommodation effectively, other than holiday lets. I feel that this study should look at the impact of holiday lets on the availability of long-term rented accommodation. How many landlords are changing their rented accommodation from long-term rents to holiday lets? Thank you.
Is that a question?
Yeah. James said something about hospital pass earlier. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because the grant we've got is and the specification we've worked out only goes so far in terms of the private renter sector. Holiday lets, in my mind, aren't in that sector. They're either a business opportunity or some form of entrepreneurial ownership. And nothing the state can do can intervene in that, either, except through taxation and business rates. So a policy that we might bring forward as a council wouldn't have any teeth in terms of stopping people converting their house to a holiday let. As far as I'm aware, there's no rules on that particularly. So I wouldn't want to bring a policy back that we then couldn't implement. I think you're right in terms of understanding the extent of the market as opposed to the private rented sector, and that will be something that the consultants will consider, but it won't be, I don't think we'll go into the detail about why people are wanting to change sectors from a business let to a holiday let or a private rent. So I understand what you're saying, and we'll put that to them, but it can't be the thrust of this project.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. I do have two questions, two queries. The first is echoing David's question. The biggest single issue in most of our villages in the Peak District is the private rented sector and holiday accommodation. And I think at the very least this study should look at the extent of that issue, even if it's not coming back to us with policies necessarily. It's scoping out the issue for us. I think if it doesn't do that, it really is a missed opportunity. So I do hope, I would ask that that is acknowledged by ourselves and Amber Valley, and that the specification is modified so we do address that issue. The second question I wanted to ask, outside of holiday accommodation, it is the major estates which own and manage the majority of private rented accommodation in the rural areas. Some of the smaller ones are very, very definitely in need of support. Some of the larger ones, I choose my words fairly carefully, are, let us say, resistant to interference by public sector, by local authorities. Can we be assured that the scope of the study will engage closely with those estates which own and manage private rented accommodation?
Thank you. Some good points, I think. I think, well, as I answered to Councillor Hughes, I think we're talking about descriptive statistics in terms of the volume and scale of holiday lets. Beyond that, I don't think there's capacity within the funding we've got to do more on holiday lets. In terms of the estates, I think you're right. They are part of the sort of tied accommodation, private rented sector, and they occasionally do cause us some concern when it comes to a tenant that has to move on for some reason, or needs adaptations to a property. So that is a legitimate aspect of the research, and one that the consultants will cover.
Councillor Purdy.
Chair, I agree with Rob. I think, there's only this amount of funding and it's specific to the title. I just want to raise the fact that on the 6th of January this year, the debate led by Tim Farron MP in the House of Commons was led on second homes. So the government are looking at this and do recognise it is an issue. I think that was alluded to by Christopher Pinter in one of his replies to me at the district networking conference as well. So rest assured it's been looked at. Hopefully they'll bring something out, because I've mentioned this before, the favourite spot I've got to go on holiday in this country is Salcombe. I think it's a fact that 90% of those homes are now holiday lets, so it takes the old vibrancy out of the community, so it's a problem, but government's looking at it.
It's getting close to half-past 8, so can somebody move that we continue past? A second? All in favour? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Buttle.
Thank you, Rob. Is this going to be a desktop exercise? Will we have somebody looking through computer records, like council housing statements or council tax statements, all that, will we actually know what's happening on the ground and what's happening on the computer? Will there be any checking? Because if there's no checking, I'm not sure that we're going to be moving much further forward apart from, ticking some boxes. Will we be assured that this is correct once we end up with?
Thanks, Councillor Buttle. A good question. As always, there will be a certain amount of data collection that has to take place first of all, so the consultants have become more familiar with the district and the characteristics of the authority and the private rented sector generally. There'll be quite a long list, I'm sure, of documents that they want to see and analyse, but there will be then discussion with, should we say, professionals or actors in the sector, from estate agents, letting agents, etc. People who provide support to people in the private rented sector. And then there'll be workshops, focus groups with both landlords and tenants to get their perspective and to then cross-reference sort of what we're hearing from the paper and what we're hearing from the people, if you like. That will be the way we take it forward.
Right, so if somebody, if one of our consultants does an Airbnb search, will they be checking that against council tax records to see whether or not that is actually registered as a home, a holiday, a business? Will we be checking whether or not it's listed as private rented and they're avoiding business costs or anything like that? Are we going to be chasing up the detail, or are we going to be just looking for some general numbers?
I think that kind of work is a different piece of work that's done by other staff, so that looking at the council tax rating of a particular property isn't what this is about. That's somebody else's role within the enforcement team of the council tax and business rates.
Thanks very much. I'm definitely going to support this. I think we need to know about this stuff, so thank you.
I've no other questions. Does anyone want to move it? And second, sorry, Councillor.
Can you speak as well? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'd like to congratulate Rob on yet another excellent report, a very brief report, but very much to the point, and more success in gaining outside funding for something in the Dales. It's fantastic the work that he does. I should declare an interest, I suppose, in a way, that my daughter's private rented housing officer at Sheffield City Council, so I hear about some of the problems that she comes across. Obviously, Sheffield's a bigger problem than Derbyshire Dales generally, but I think here it's probably more a case of a shortage of private rented housing, and the quality is probably akin to other authorities like Sheffield, I guess, but and there are obviously lots of problems in terms of tenant landlord-tenant relationships as well, like they obviously get in Sheffield. I don't think it gets to violent situations that she sometimes has to deal with environmental health officers, but I do congratulate Rob and hope that this report is quite revealing when it's actually produced. It'd be interesting to look at it and debate it sometime in the future when it's complete. What can I ask what the timescale is exactly? I'm not sure if it says that in the report.
I should hope that we'll have a completion by October.
Yeah, right, very good. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Councillor Hughes?
Yes, I'd like to second it. I'd certainly agree with what Martin has said about it as well. Thank you.
There's no other speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Sorry? Councillor Ball? Okay.
So it's just a comment to say that, I can understand that Rob does do a heck of a lot of work, and all the money that he gets, he doesn't spend it frivolously, and we have a very good outcome within the district for our housing needs. So congratulations again for this, and I hope it continues. Thank you.
Thank you. I repeat it has been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. That completes the business for this evening. Thank you for your attendance, and those viewers as well. Thank you.
Oh.